going to introduce right now Michael Franzese, who we are super excited to have on. We want him to talk about today, high stakes negotiation. I mean, if there's someone who has been through life or death, high stakes negotiation, it is Michael. I mean, he has sat across the table with John Gotti and some extremely bodacious, guys who probably had such strong-willed mindsets, and he has been in situations where I assume he probably couldn't mess up saying one word in a negotiation, or it could be a life or death mistake. And I'm trying to not make a life or death mistake right now, while facilitating this right now. So Michael, thank you so much. He is a former captain of the Colombo crime family. And I believe you're the only living boss of the Colombo crime family. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, I was a capo regime or captain at that time, and I'm not the only living one. I'm sure there's guys still around in Brooklyn, but I'm probably the only one that's been able to walk away, not enter a witness protection program or cooperate with the government, and live a pretty happy and blessed life. So I would say that's pretty true.
Yeah. So Michael has he was the youngest and I think equivalent in today's dollars wealthiest person in the entire mafia, arguably making over $1 billion, and on more of the business side. So Michael, thank you so much for taking the time. I think the first thing we wanted to drill into today is how to have a productive sit down, right? So that we can resolve issues from the principles you've learned sitting down with some very, very volatile people.
It's funny you asked that, because I wrote a book a few years back. It was a business book called "I'll Make You an Offer You Can't Refuse." And my publisher at the time, HarperCollins, after they read the chapter on the sit down, they decided there would be no more meetings in HarperCollins. Everything would be a sit down from that point on, because they're that much more effective. You get things done. But, basically, everything we resolved during that life is in a sit down, where you actually get together, you sit down and you go over the problem, whatever it might be. It could be something very serious, could be something kind of menial, but the rules of the sit down are very firm. And that is, number one, you must always be respectful. If two made guys that actually took the oath, are on opposing sides, and let's say I was sitting with John Gotti and I knew John was lying through his teeth, I could not call him a liar. If I call him a liar, I automatically lose the sit down. I have to figure out a way tactfully to get my point across and win the argument. And there's a technique to that, especially I was one of the younger guys, and the old timers were, pretty astute at knowing how to handle themselves. There were certain rules. I mean, you always had to be respectful to one another. I always say that you have to go in with your, both barrels loaded. You got to know exactly your opposition. Like, again, because you bring up Gotti, and I had, more than one sit down with him, I had to know his personality. I understood going in that John was the type of guy that would never admit to losing an argument. So I had to figure out how to get what I wanted and yet still make him think that he came out on top. And, again, these are all things that you can't explain at the moment, but it's knowing your opponent, knowing his personality, his character. Second thing, anytime I went in, I knew what I would settle for. If I couldn't win the argument, I knew what my second choice was. And if I saw that I couldn't get what I wanted, I tactfully kind of moved to the second part of that. And that's really important, because you don't win every negotiation, but you have to know what you'll settle for and what will work for you. And I never went in thinking that I was going to lose or knowing that I would lose, because I don't know about most of you, but I don't like to get a no answer about anything. If I'm, applying for a loan, I make sure that I'm going to get that loan when I apply for it. I do all my research. I know the possibilities and so on and so forth. So it's the same thing. It's knowing your opponent, being respectful, because when meetings turn into fighting matches, nothing is ever accomplished. the good thing also about a sit down is that the boss's word is final. That's it. You accept it at the end of it, like it or not, that's the way it goes. And you don't even bring it up again. It's over at that point. So, we had to do that in our life. It was very effective, just in our normal business and in moving on. But I can tell you, I think one of the most high stakes negotiation I ever had was with the federal government in negotiating a plea agreement. And the one thing I tell people all the time, I get a lot of people asking me, they have legal issues. And I said, listen, you got to look for a point where you have leverage. If you don't have leverage with the government, if you don't have leverage in a meeting, most of the times you're not going to come out on top. And fortunately, in negotiation I had with the Eastern District of New York, I was able to get some leverage because the key witness that they had testifying against me had testified against me in another case that Giuliani prosecuted me on, and I was acquitted. So they were concerned about the effectiveness of their key witness, and that allowed me to get about as good a deal as I can get from them. So again, having leverage going in is very important.
Unbelievable. I guess the next question is managing large teams and the organizational structure of the Mafia. So if we kind of zoom out and you look at the organizational structure with, consigliere, underboss, boss, captains, what did you learn about the organizational structure of the Mafia, and how can that be applied in business in an effective way?
Well, I think one of the reasons, a major reason why the Mafia in America, Cosa Nostra, was able to survive and prosper under some, pretty serious conditions was because we had that organization and that structure, and we held very firm to it. The boss was the boss, the underboss was the underboss. We had a consigliere that was the advisor. The real job of the consigliere was not only to advise the boss, but it was really to be a liaison between the soldiers and the boss. In other words, if a soldier had an issue with the boss, he would go to his consigliere to try to work it out. The problem with that in our life, because there's always another side to things, is that the consigliere was handpicked by the boss. And if you went to the consigliere with a problem with the boss, it probably wouldn't work out well for you. So you never did that. In that life, it's always good to keep quiet and not let your feelings of dissatisfaction really known unless you're ready to make a move and act upon it. But, the organizational structure was very important. And, look, I had a big crew, as I'm sure some of you know, as I had organized a big scheme to defraud the government out of taxing every gallon of gasoline. It was a major operation. I had over 300 people working with me or for me. And, to keep that organized and structured properly, because it was, in that case, it was an illegal thing that we were doing. And you had to have a lot of control over the people that you were involved with, meaning I had to know their personalities. I had to know to what degree I could trust them, how much information I could give them, what I should withhold from them. So there was a lot of thought that went into, the structure of that. But, I think, and the unfortunate thing in that life, you've got to be honest, there is the fear factor where people don't want to make a mistake for fear of some kind of retribution that could be serious. And you don't have that, fortunately, in a legitimate world. But I think, knowing the people that you have working for you obviously is very important. Not giving them too much credit for things that you think they should be doing, and making sure that they're in their right slot, I think is really important. And that's something that, I'm going to be honest with you. People used to tell me, Michael, you're a brilliant businessman. You made all this money. You had all these things going. And I'd be the first one to admit I was not a brilliant businessman, because there was things that, number one, I didn't understand and I didn't have patience for. So I didn't want to be involved in. But I think the talent I had was twofold. Number one, I knew how to recognize a good opportunity. I knew how to weed through everything and say, okay, this makes sense, something I want to pursue. And then I knew how to put the right people in place to manage the different areas of that opportunity. And I was a good motivator. I was able to get the most out of them. So I always believe, you're only as good as the people you have around you. And my motto always used to be, do what you do best, delegate the rest, and get the most out of them.
Mm.
That's how I was able to have some success.
So another question is your take on being the smartest person in the room, and it's so fascinating to me because when you think of, like, for example, you leading 300 people on this huge operation you were running, you'd think that you'd be like, the leadership picture that comes to mind would be like the John Gotti type, where you're super loud and flashy and out there. It seems like your leadership style and your negotiation style is more like letting other people think they're the smartest person in the room. So talk to us about your beliefs around that.
Well, yeah, and it all goes back to my belief that when you remain silent, people are guessing. They don't know, what you're thinking. They don't know how much you know or how much you don't know. So there were times when I was in a negotiation that I knew I was the smartest person in the room. But I didn't want people to know that because I wanted to hear what they had to say. I wanted them to talk. I wanted them to think that they were educating me. Because by the time they were finished, they just spilled their guts on everything. And I knew exactly, how I was going to deal with them. And there's other times when, I was in a negotiation and I wasn't the smartest guy in the room. But if you keep quiet, you know, they're still going to talk and they're going to educate you in a way that by the end of their talking, because a lot of people love to, somebody uses the word bloviate. A lot of people like to talk. They just like to talk. And when they talk and you're a good listener and you're absorbing everything, by the end of their conversation, you know what you're going to do at that point. So it's always a matter of, speaking less, letting other people talk, and then making your decision.
So I think another question I have, so many questions, is how would you, what decisions were you mostly responsible for, and then how would you communicate those? Because you were very involved mostly on the business side, right? You were
Yeah.
you were looked at as a hot commodity because you were an income earner. And I'm curious, going from business opportunity idea to deciding on doing that and then communicating that across 300 people, what was your habit there? Would you just have a meeting with one or two team leaders? Like, how would you disseminate information once a decision was made?
Yeah, I mean, depending upon the situation, there were times when I brought in a group and sat them down and talked to them. And there were times when I would just communicate with one guy that I trusted and I knew that he would communicate the rest to everyone else. But that life, you have to be on your toes all the time. I mean, you can't make mistakes. It's funny. I was watching The Godfather the other day. I do a YouTube channel, and every Monday I review a mob movie, and people love it. And I was watching The Godfather, and there's a scene in there that's just terrific where Don Corleone is in the garden with Michael, and he has some regrets. He says, I never wanted to be careless in my life. Careless is okay for women and children, but it's never good for a man. And sometimes it's art imitating life. Well, that is so true in my former life. You cannot be careless. You have to measure almost every word that you say, especially if it's somebody significant that you're talking to. So I was always very, very measured in my words, even to somebody close to me, because look, in that life, you never knew. One day somebody's close to you, the next day, they're close to somebody else. So I always weighed my words very carefully. And I think that's a good practice in life too, and especially these days where, I don't know, respect seems to have, it's not the same that there was when I was growing up as a kid. Respect was a major issue in life. And I was brought up that way, respect, respect, respect. And I think there's less of that today. So being measured in your conversation and being on your guard, I think is just important. It's a good way to go through life.
Yeah, I definitely could learn a lot from that. Hey, Mark, I'm curious. You probably have a question or two brewing. Why don't you ask Michael a question? I'm curious what you want to learn from someone as smart as him. I think
Well,
you're the smartest guy in the room right now, by the way.
what I just sort of noticed, and what I would love Michael to talk more about is, we talk about the mob or Cosa Nostra or whatever, and they sound like criminals, like, oh, they're criminals. But it's actually, and he mentioned this, it's a very well-oiled organization that has very specific rules. So you can say that their behavior is criminal enterprise, but they have rules. They have, he mentioned the respect. He mentioned the hierarchy. He mentioned, you have your grievances, but once those grievances are aired, you hear the answer and you have to live by it, just like lawyers have to do when a judge rules for or against you. So I'd love a little bit more information from Michael as just that structure, the hierarchy, the fact that you can suggest it's for illegal behavior, but their success was based upon the fact that that respect and those rules meant everything to the organization. And that's what I respect about it.
Well, that's absolutely true. I mean, respect was a major issue. Like I said, you can never be disrespectful to another made guy, ever. And if you did, you paid a serious price for that. So, and I think it helped us a lot because, we had arguments, but they were always respectful arguments. I know that may sound crazy because, you see the movies and you see all of this stuff and there's a lot of violence all the time. And there is violence in that life, no doubt about it. But our everyday interaction with each other, one another, was very respectful. It had to be that way. So, I think, again, when you look at our organization, my former organization, and you see that we were so different than other organizations. Why? I always say this, and, if you take the Mexican cartels or the Colombians, if you take drugs away from them, they disappear. Everything is built around drugs. But in our former life, I mean, we infiltrated society, at the highest levels. I mean, from the guy on the street in the numbers business right up to the White House. We control the unions in this country. You control the unions in a great way. You control the country because there's so much money involved. There's so much power involved. There's so much, if we would call a Teamster strike, just think about it. 2.5 million people stop working. All the trucks stop. That's it. No goods move around the country. If you control the docks like we did, if we call a strike, nothing comes in or out of the country. You cripple America in that way. And that had a lot of impact, even politically. And people realized that. And so we were able to infiltrate society just about every level. And we did that not by muscle all the time. We didn't always, look, I was a guy that the less violence I had to use, the better. There's always that saying, you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And if you make people want to like you and want to be around you because they believe you have a service that you can provide to them, whether it be protection or money or just visibility by being around somebody, it went a long way. And a lot of guys were very skillful at that. Some weren't, but a lot of guys were. And that was what enabled us to, to have such an impact here in America. And I did something interesting the other day. When you look at it, what really caused the Mafia to have so much power in this country? And the answer to that is prohibition. It was prohibition that really gave us the money and the power to grow into the force that we grew into. And so I make a joke out. I says, it was the government that put the mob in business in a big way. And they got even with us actually in the mid 80s with the Racketeering Act, that's for sure. Whatever they gave us, they certainly took away. But I don't know if I really responded to your question, but.
I have one. I mean, we're just learning a lot from this, Michael. If you were to build $1 billion company today, right, and you had, let's say, 3 years to do it, what would be the 3 most important moves that you would follow from your lessons? Because you already have built $1 billion in revenue thing before. So what would be the 3 most important moves you would do from your lessons?
Well, I'd pick out the industry that's possible to happen in. And to me, it's either tech or oil. It'd be one of those two. I have experience in gas, so I might have picked that one I have more experience there than I do in the tech business. But and then again, it would be just finding the right environment, the right deal, the right environment, and then putting the right people in place to manage it with my overseeing it. And obviously the person that's going to do this has to have some good insight, some understanding of what they're getting involved in. And, a lot of this is managing people. If you learn how to manage people in this world, you can really go far. Because look, it's the people around you that make you strong. My father taught me something a long time ago, and he didn't mean this to be offensive, but he was so right. He always said to me, Michael, be careful, always be good to the little people. Now, when he said little people, he didn't mean that in an offensive way. He meant respect everybody because they're the people that make you strong. And I found that out in my life, you know, when the valet parker is talking well about you and the waiters in the restaurant are talking good about you and people that you meet have a nice thing to say about you, it goes a long way. It really does. And so, you know, I always try to be respectful for people, and it really worked throughout my life. And look, I'll be honest with you. I don't know how I survived walking away from that life, but I think one of the things I had in my favor is I didn't make a lot of enemies in my time in that life. I made people earn money with me, and I didn't make a lot of enemies. And I wasn't quick to judge people because in that life, you know, that life is like a wheel. And you come into situations where you may be passing judgment on somebody's life or death. And I was always the last one to condemn somebody because I knew if my turn ever came, if I was the first one, well, they treat me the same way. And people remember that stuff. They remember how you treat them. And I think that caused a lot. I mean, that's a major reason why I was able to survive because look, I never held my former associates short. I don't cut them short. They're very capable. And if there was really an effort to come and get me, they could have succeeded because I'm not in hiding. I never have been. I was careful, but I never went into hiding. So, you know, I think those are good ways to just deal with life.
Man, I got to become more respectful. I feel like I'm too much of a loudmouth. All right. So I'm learning a lot right here, Michael. I got to bite my tongue more often. So thank you so much for the time, Michael. I know your time is limited, and we really appreciate your time on here. Any final tips for everyone here looking to succeed in business? About over 80% of our audience are law firm owners. So any tips, anyone, before you sign off?
Well, I don't know if I can give anybody any lawyers advice, but I'll tell you one thing, you know, on the street, you know, for all you lawyers that are representing, if you represent any mob guys or any criminals, we always say, never admit the truth to your lawyer, never. So always look, don't ever say you're guilty to your lawyer ever, no matter what.
All right.
And never pay him in full until you either get acquitted or what.
No. We have our first point of controversy.
So I'm telling you this, get your money up front.
Yes.
Make sure you get paid before you go to trial, or at least before it's over.
And to all those potential criminals out there, tell your lawyer everything. He doesn't work harder for you just because you want to convince him you're innocent. Tell him all the downsides.
So just do the opposite of what Michael said.
Mark, I got to tell you, though, I agree with you on that now because, you know, I realize that a lawyer's job, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, because you're the expert here, not me. But in a criminal trial, a lawyer's job in defending his client is not to prove innocence or guilt. It's just to bring up reasonable doubt.
Right. What I do, and I joke about this, Mike, you're right. I joke about this, but I say, look, I train prosecutors. If you're going to get your conviction of Michael, you got to get it through me. And if you don't do everything perfect, I'm going to point it out to the judge, to the jury, to the witnesses, and you're not going to get your conviction. So I represent the Constitution more than I represent Michael. He's the guy in front of me right now. But no, you're right. It's not. And people think, oh, if he thinks I'm guilty, I won't work hard. No. That's not my point. The point is I'm going to represent the Constitution. You are not getting to my client unless you get through me.
Well, you know what? And I hope every attorney has that attitude because that's what safeguards us against anarchy. Yeah. It's protecting the Constitution, not so much the defendant, but, you know, it's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And if they don't meet that standard, then the guy should go free or the woman. That's it.
Thank you again so much for the time, Michael, and appreciate all the lessons. I will be biting my tongue more frequently, I think, now. So
that's a good quality.
Yeah.